June 13, 1944, Villers-Bocage, France. The burning hulk of what was once a Sherman tank lit up the Norman dawn. Inside, 4 men were dead. Outside, Staff Sergeant James Flowers of the 2nd Armoured Division pressed himself against a hedgerow, watching the Tiger tank that had just killed his platoon disappear into the mist. In his blood-stained notebook, he wrote one sentence: "We need 5 tanks to kill one of theirs. Most of us won't survive long enough to learn how." Flowers was right about the odds. He was wrong about survival. By war's end, he would be one of the American tankers who learned not just to survive, but to hunt the most feared machines in warfare. This is the story of how American tank crews transformed from terrified victims into confident hunters, not through better equipment, but through tactics so ruthless and effective that German tankers would come to fear the supposedly inferior Sherman. The mathematics of death were brutally simple in June 1944. A German Panther tank could destroy a Sherman at 1,500 yards. The Sherman's 75mm gun could only penetrate a Panther's frontal armour at 100 yards or less. The Panther had 80mm of sloped armour. The Sherman had 51mm of flat armour. One Panther could destroy an entire Sherman platoon before American tanks got close enough to fight back. The US Army knew this. They had known it for months before D-Day. General Omar Bradley himself had said, "I would rather have a good number of Shermans than a small number of better tanks." What he didn't say publicly was the dark calculus behind that choice. American industry could replace Shermans faster than Germany could build Panthers. The question wasn't whether American tankers would die. The question was whether enough would survive long enough to learn how to win. The hedgerows of Normandy became a graveyard for American armour in June 1944. The bocage, ancient earthen walls topped with dense vegetation, created a maze of narrow lanes where German tanks could hide and ambush. Every corner could conceal death. Every field entrance could be a kill zone. Lieutenant Belton Cooper of the 3rd Armoured Division spent those early weeks not fighting but recovering the dead. As a maintenance officer, his job was to salvage destroyed Shermans and retrieve the bodies inside. In his memoirs, Cooper would describe finding tanks where the armour had been penetrated so violently that crew members were literally blown to bits. He counted 648 Shermans knocked out in his division alone during the Normandy campaign. But Cooper also noticed something else. Some crews survived, some even thrived. The difference wasn't luck, it was learning. Corporal Clarence Smoyer of the 3rd Armoured Division's Company E experienced his baptism by fire on June 29th near Villers-Fossard. His platoon of 5 Shermans rounded a hedgerow corner and found themselves facing 2 Panthers at 400 yards. The German tanks fired first. 2 Shermans exploded within seconds, their turrets blown completely off by the force of ammunition detonating inside. Smoyer's tank commander, Sergeant Paul Faircloth, screamed into the intercom, "Back up! Back up now!" Their driver, Homer Davis, threw the Sherman into reverse. The Panther's next shot passed through the space they'd occupied a second earlier. As they reversed around the corner, Smoyer saw the other 2 Shermans in his platoon burning, 8 men dead in less than 30 seconds. That night, Faircloth gathered the surviving crew members. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "We can't fight them head-on," he said. "Every tank manual, every training exercise we did, forget all of it. We need new rules." What Faircloth and thousands of other American tank commanders learned in those bloody weeks would transform American armoured warfare. The tactics weren't invented by generals in headquarters. They were discovered by desperate men who had to innovate or die. The first week of fighting revealed the magnitude of the problem. On June 30th, elements of the 743rd Tank Battalion, supporting the 30th Infantry Division, attempted to attack German positions near Saint-Jean-de-Day. A platoon of 5 Shermans advanced down a farm road, following doctrine that called for aggressive forward movement to support infantry. They never saw the 2 Panthers concealed in a tree line 800 yards away. Staff Sergeant Robert Mitchell commanded the lead Sherman. Through his periscope, he saw the first muzzle flash but couldn't identify its source. His tank shuddered as an armour-piercing round struck the turret, penetrating just below the gun mantlet. The shell continued through the fighting compartment, killing the gunner and loader instantly. Flames erupted from the ammunition storage. Mitchell and his driver managed to bail out, both severely burned. The second Sherman tried to reverse, but struck a hedgerow. Unable to move, the tank became a stationary target. The Panther's next round penetrated the side armor, detonating inside the engine compartment. The crew survived, but their tank was destroyed. The remaining 3 Shermans withdrew in confusion, having never identified the enemy's position. This pattern repeated itself across Normandy throughout late June and early July. American tank units, trained for mobile warfare in open terrain, found themselves ambushed in close terrain where their doctrinal advantages meant nothing. The German defenders, fighting from prepared positions with superior tanks, inflicted devastating losses. By early July 1944, American tankers had begun learning through brutal trial and error. The lessons came at terrible cost, but they came. Small unit commanders, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, started developing tactics that worked in the Norman hedgerows. The first breakthrough came from understanding what the Sherman could do, rather than lamenting what it couldn't. Technical Sergeant William Hartman of the 2nd Armoured Division kept detailed notes of every tank engagement his battalion fought. By analysing these reports, Hartman identified a critical fact. When Shermans achieved side or rear shots on German tanks, they won. The 75mm gun that bounced harmlessly off Panther frontal armour could penetrate side armour at 600 yards. The problem was getting to the flank. German tanks in defensive positions were positioned to protect their vulnerable sides. Panthers would be placed hull down behind berms or buildings, presenting only their thick frontal armour to approaching American tanks. Any Sherman attempting to manoeuvre for a flank shot would be spotted and destroyed before getting into position. Hartman proposed a solution that seemed insane: sacrifice 1 tank to save 3. If one Sherman deliberately exposed itself to draw German fire, the other tanks in the platoon could manoeuvre into flanking positions while the enemy was distracted. The tactic violated every principle of self-preservation, but mathematically it made sense. Losing 1 Sherman to destroy 1 Panther was better than losing 3 or 4 Shermans while the Panther escaped. On July 7th, near La Haye-du-Puy, Sergeant Frank Audifred volunteered his Sherman to test the tactic. His platoon had been ordered to eliminate a Panther blocking an infantry advance. The German tank occupied a position near a stone farmhouse, its gun covering the only approach road. Audifred's plan was simple but terrifying. He would advance straight down the road, drawing the Panther's fire, while 2 other Shermans circled through an orchard to attack from the flank. "If I die," Audifred told his crew, "make sure they get that bastard." The crew could have refused. They could have found reasons to delay. Instead, driver Lloyd Jensen put the Sherman in gear and advanced toward the Panther. At 500 yards, the German tank fired. The round struck Audifred's Sherman on the left side of the turret, but hit at an angle that caused the shell to deflect rather than penetrate. The impact knocked Audifred unconscious and wounded the loader, but the tank remained operational. While the Panther's crew reloaded, the 2 flanking Shermans emerged from the orchard at 300 yards. Both fired simultaneously. 1 round struck the Panther's side armour just below the turret ring. The other penetrated the rear deck, igniting fuel. The German tank exploded. Audifred's crew survived, though he spent 2 weeks in a field hospital recovering from concussion. Word of the tactic spread rapidly through informal channels, from crew to crew, platoon to platoon. By mid-July, American tank units across Normandy were employing variations of what they called the bait and kill, or shooter-killer tactic. Some commanders formalized it, others let it emerge organically. But the principle was consistent. Sacrifice was necessary to achieve victory. By late July 1944, American tank crews had developed what veteran tankers called the 5 rules for killing Panthers. These weren't written in any field manual. They were passed from experienced crews to replacements, taught through demonstration rather than classroom instruction. Each rule had been paid for in blood. The first and most important rule violated everything American soldiers had been taught about courage and honor. Never engage a German tank one-on-one. Never. The Sherman lost that fight 19 times out of 20. Instead, American doctrine evolved around overwhelming numbers. When a platoon encountered a German tank, all 5 Shermans would attack simultaneously from multiple directions. While the Panther could kill 1, maybe 2 Shermans, the other 3 or 4 would get flank shots. The Germans called this Rudel tactic, pack tactics, and they had no effective counter. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Pool of the 3rd Armoured Division mastered this tactic. Pool understood that the first Sherman to engage would probably die. So he volunteered his tank to be first, but only if his platoon promised to avenge him by destroying the enemy tank. On July 12th, near Saint-Jean-de-Day, Pool's Sherman drew fire from a Panther, while 4 other Shermans manoeuvred into position. The Panther fired twice at Pool. Both shots miraculously missed. The 4 flanking Shermans fired 8 rounds. 6 penetrated the Panther's side armour. The German tank exploded. Pool survived that engagement. Over the next 69 days, he would participate in 81 days of combat operations, destroying 12 German tanks personally and contributing to the destruction of 258 armoured vehicles. His success wasn't due to superior equipment, it was superior tactics. Technical Sergeant Edward Spires of the 4th Armoured Division documented another application of the first rule. On July 28th, during Operation Cobra, his platoon encountered 3 Panzer IV tanks near Coutances. Instead of engaging frontally, Spires held his platoon in covered positions while calling for artillery support. The artillery didn't destroy the German tanks, but it forced them to button up, closing all hatches to protect against shell splinters. With German vision restricted, Spires led his platoon in a rapid flanking manoeuvre. The Shermans covered 600 yards in 2 minutes, emerging on the German tank's flank at 200 yards. Before the Panzer IV crews could react, all 3 German tanks were burning. Not a single Sherman was damaged. "Fighting fair is for sports," Spires wrote in a letter home. "This is war. We use every advantage we can get." The second rule focused on terrain. German tanks were faster on roads but slower in rough terrain than Shermans. The Panther's weight and narrow tracks created higher ground pressure than the Sherman's wider tracks. In soft ground, mud or steep slopes, the lighter Sherman could go places Panthers couldn't follow. American crews learned to deliberately avoid roads and drag German tanks into terrain where their technical disadvantages became tactical advantages. This required intimate knowledge of local geography and willingness to take risks in difficult terrain. Sergeant John Roller of the 6th Armoured Division became expert at terrain exploitation. On August 8th, near Mortagne, Roller's platoon spotted 6 Panzer IV tanks advancing along a paved road. Instead of engaging them on the road where the German tanks had advantages of speed and formation, Roller led his platoon into a muddy apple orchard on a hillside. The German tanks followed, unwilling to let American armour operate freely on their flank. But the orchard proved treacherous. Trees limited visibility and manoeuvre space. Soft ground from recent rains bogged down the heavier German tanks. The Panzer IVs broke formation as drivers struggled with difficult terrain. Roller's Shermans, already positioned in good firing positions among the trees, picked off German tanks one by one. At ranges under 200 yards, the Sherman's 75mm gun could penetrate Panzer IV armour easily. All 6 German tanks were destroyed. Roller's platoon didn't lose a single Sherman. The lesson spread: fight where the Sherman was strong, not where the enemy was strong. If German tanks were on roads, attack from muddy fields. If they were in open terrain, attack from towns where narrow streets neutralized range advantages. If they were hull down on ridges, bypass them and attack from behind. Lieutenant Raymond Moses of the 3rd Armoured Division took terrain exploitation further. He studied Norman geography obsessively, learning every farm trail, stream crossing, and covered approach. Moses could navigate at night without lights, using terrain features to maintain orientation. On August 13th, near Argenton, Moses led his platoon on a night movement through German-held territory. Using farm trails and covered routes, he positioned his Shermans behind suspected German tank positions. At dawn, Moses attacked from the rear, destroying 2 Panthers and a Tiger before the Germans realized American tanks were behind them. "The Panther is a better tank on paper," Moses told a replacement officer, "but paper doesn't include ditches, hedgerows, muddy fields, and narrow village streets. Know the terrain better than the enemy and you win. The third rule formalized what Ordifred had discovered, deliberately sacrificing one tank's safety to enable killing shots by other tanks. By August 1944, virtually every American tank platoon employed some version of the shooter-killer split. The shooter role rotated among platoon tanks to distribute risk. No crew was expected to be shooter more than once or twice before rotating to the killer position. It was brutal calculus, sacrifice some to save more. The psychological toll was immense. Sergeant Marcus Thompson of the 2nd Armoured Division described it. When it's your turn to be shooter, you know you've got maybe 50-50 odds of taking a hit. But you do it because if nobody volunteers, we all die. Fear doesn't go away, but duty is stronger than fear. On August 15th, near Écouché, Lieutenant William McVeigh faced the hardest decision of his career. His platoon had orders to eliminate 2 Panthers blocking a critical road junction. McVeigh drew the short straw. His tank would be shooter. McVeigh briefed his crew honestly. "We're going to draw their fire. They'll probably hit us. Get ready to bail out fast if we're penetrated, but give our guys time to get into position first." Nobody complained. They'd all volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks. McVeigh's Sherman advanced into the open. The first Panther fired at 600 yards, missing by inches. McVeigh kept advancing, giving his platoon time to maneuver. The Panther fired again, this time striking McVeigh's tank on the turret side. The shell penetrated, killing the loader and wounding the gunner. But the tank didn't brew up, the ammunition didn't detonate. While McVeigh's crew bailed out under machine gun fire, 4 killer Shermans emerged from concealment. 8 75mm rounds hit the 2 Panthers within seconds. Both German tanks exploded. McVeigh survived with shrapnel wounds. His gunner lost an arm. The loader was buried in France. After recovering from his wounds, McVeigh refused evacuation to England. He returned to his platoon with a replacement crew. "We invented these tactics," he said. "We have to teach new crews how to use them." The fourth rule emphasized pack tactics. German tank doctrine emphasized individual tank excellence. Each Panther or Tiger was a lethal killing machine superior to any Allied tank. But German tanks often operated independently or in pairs, relying on their technical superiority to overcome numerical disadvantages. American doctrine went the opposite direction. Sherman platoons of 5 tanks stayed together obsessively. If one tank spotted an enemy, all 5 converged. This created overwhelming firepower at decisive points. A German tank might destroy 1 or 2 Shermans, but 5 Shermans firing together could destroy any German tank through sheer volume of fire. Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armoured Division, enforced pack tactics ruthlessly. Any tank commander who separated from his platoon faced immediate relief. Abrams told his officers, "I don't care if you see an opportunity. I don't care if you think you can get a kill. You stay with your platoon. 5 tanks together beat any German tank. 1 tank alone is target practice." The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 vindicated Abrams' doctrine. The 4th Armoured Division faced elements of the 5th Panzer Army, including over 200 German tanks. Through 11 days of vicious fighting, American tanks destroyed 86 German tanks while losing 41 Shermans. Abrams' battalion alone destroyed 30 German tanks without losing a single Sherman. How? Pack tactics. German tanks advancing individually or in pairs found themselves swarmed by entire American platoons appearing from multiple directions. The technical superiority of individual German tanks meant nothing against coordinated American attacks. Staff Sergeant Curtis Culin of Abrams' battalion described a typical engagement at Aracourt. 3 Panthers came down this hill thinking they owned the place. We had 2 platoons, 10 Shermans, positioned in a tree line. We let them get to 400 yards. Then all 10 of us opened up at once. It was like a firing squad. Those Panthers never knew what hit them. 15 seconds, 3 dead Germans, 0 American losses. The Germans recognized the effectiveness of American pack tactics. A captured document from the 111th Panzer Brigade, dated September 22, 1944, stated, "Enemy tanks operate in large groups, coordinating fires effectively. When engaging one enemy tank, expect multiple tanks to appear from unexpected directions. Individual Panther superiority is negated by enemy numerical and tactical coordination. The fifth rule emphasized speed and reliability. The Sherman's greatest advantage over German tanks wasn't its gun or armor, it was speed and reliability. A Sherman could sustain 26 miles per hour cross-country, while a Panther struggled to maintain 15 miles per hour on rough terrain. More importantly, Shermans rarely broke down while German tanks frequently suffered mechanical failures. American crews learned to use speed as both weapon and shield. Hit-and-run tactics replaced static defense. American Shermans would appear, strike, and disappear before German tanks could respond effectively. During Operation Cobra in late July 1944, American armored divisions raced through German lines so quickly that Panthers and Tigers couldn't establish defensive positions. When German tanks tried to counterattack, they found American Shermans had already bypassed them and were attacking from behind. Technical Sergeant Richard Cowan of the 2nd Armored Division kept detailed diaries of his unit's advance. On July 28th alone, his company advanced 15 miles, fighting 5 separate engagements with German armor. "We'd hit them, kill 1 or 2, then disappear before they could organize a response," Cowan wrote. "By the time they figured out where we'd gone, we were 5 miles away hitting someone else. Our speed gave us the initiative." The M18 Hellcat tank destroyer took this doctrine to extremes. With a top speed of 50 miles per hour, the Hellcat could strike and relocate before enemy return fire arrived. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's Hellcat destroyed 4 Panthers on August 19th near Chambois, using pure speed and maneuver. The German crews never saw Leiper's vehicle, only muzzle flashes from constantly changing positions. Reliability proved equally important. A running Sherman beat a broken Panther every time. German tanks required extensive maintenance. The Panther needed major overhauls every 1,000 miles. Shermans could run 2,000 miles between major maintenance. In sustained operations, German mechanical failure rates approached 30%, while American failure rates stayed under 5%. Sergeant Howard Hart of the 3rd Armored Division witnessed this advantage repeatedly. "We'd roll through a village and find Panthers just sitting there, abandoned because they broke down. No battle damage, just mechanical failure. Our tanks kept running. That's a huge advantage that nobody talks about." Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, 1944, marked the turning point where American tactical innovations transformed from desperate improvisation into systematic doctrine. The massive breakout from Normandy gave American armored units the fluid, mobile warfare conditions where their tactics proved devastating. Major General Maurice Rose, who would later command the 3rd Armored Division, observed Cobra operations and immediately grasped their significance. Rose saw that American tank crews had developed tactics specifically optimized for the Sherman's characteristics, rather than trying to fight like Germans with inferior equipment. On July 28th, Rose attended a conference with tank battalion commanders from the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions. The discussion focused on lessons learned and standardizing effective tactics. Colonel Truman Boudinot of the 3rd Armored Division's Combat Command B presented data his operations staff had compiled. "In June, we lost 3 to 4 tanks for every German tank we destroyed," Boudinot reported. "In July, after adopting these new tactics, we're losing less than 2 tanks per kill. Some battalions report 1-to-1 exchange rates or better. The difference is tactics, not equipment." Rose ordered these tactics incorporated into formal training for replacement crews and reinforcement units. What had emerged organically from battlefield experience would now be taught systematically. New tank commanders arriving in theatre would learn the 5 rules before seeing combat. The impact was immediate and measurable. Replacement crews using the new tactics had survival rates 40% higher than earlier replacements who'd used pre-war doctrine. More importantly, these crews were more effective. They destroyed more enemy tanks while losing fewer of their own. Staff Sergeant Henry Danner arrived in France in early August 1944 as a replacement tank commander. Before joining his assigned unit, Danner spent 3 days training with veteran crews who demonstrated the 5 rules in practice exercises. "They showed us exactly how to bait Panthers, how to coordinate platoon movements, how to use terrain," Danner recalled. "When I finally joined my unit, I felt prepared instead of terrified. Danner's first combat engagement came on August 12th near Argentan. His platoon encountered two Panthers in a textbook scenario, German tanks occupying hull-down positions covering a road. Using the tactics he'd been taught, Danner's platoon executed a coordinated attack, one shooter to draw fire, two killers manoeuvring for flank shots. Both Panthers were destroyed. Danner's platoon suffered no losses. "Without that training, we probably would have attacked frontally and lost 3 tanks, Danner said. "The tactics our guys invented saved my life on my first day of combat." The Battle of the Falaise Pocket in August 1944 provided dramatic proof of American tactical superiority. German forces attempting to escape encirclement had to fight through American armoured units that had perfected their tank-killing tactics. Despite German forces including substantial numbers of Panthers and Tigers, American tanks destroyed German armour at favourable exchange rates. On August 19th, near Chambois, the 90th Infantry Division and attached tank units formed part of the southern shoulder of the Falaise Pocket. German armoured columns trying to break out repeatedly attacked American positions. Unlike earlier battles where German armour might have broken through, American tankers now knew exactly how to respond. Sergeant Marcus Williams commanded a Sherman platoon defending a crossroads. Over 6 hours, his platoon engaged multiple German attacks, destroying 5 Panthers, 3 Panzer IVs, and 2 Stu G3s. Williams' platoon lost 2 Shermans, but both crews survived. The Germans didn't break through. "They kept coming at us expecting to smash through like they did in June," Williams reported. "But we weren't the same tankers they'd faced before." We knew what we were doing now. Every time they attacked, we'd bait them, flank them, kill them. It was almost routine by then. The most compelling evidence for American tactical evolution comes from German tankers themselves. By late summer 1944, German veterans who had once viewed American Shermans with contempt developed grudging respect for American tank crews. Hauptmann Rolf Hertenstein, a Panther commander captured near Bastogne in December 1944, told American interrogators, "Your tanks are inferior, this is known, but your tactics are superior, and this matters more. You attack with 5, 6, 7 tanks against 1 or 2 of ours. You flank, you surround, you use terrain expertly. We have better equipment but worse tactics." German after-action reports from autumn 1944 repeatedly note American tactical improvements. A report from the 2nd Panzer Division, dated October 15th, stated, "Enemy tank crews demonstrate significantly improved tactical proficiency. American tanks now routinely operate in mutually supporting formations, utilize terrain for cover, and coordinate combined arms attacks effectively. The technical superiority of our armoured vehicles is increasingly negated by American numerical and tactical advantages." Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding armoured reconnaissance units against American forces, wrote in his memoirs, "The Americans learned faster than we did." Their junior officers and NCOS had freedom to experiment and adapt that our rigid doctrine didn't permit. By autumn, I feared American tank units more than British ones, even though the British often had better tanks. The Americans fought smarter. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided a final test. When German forces launched their surprise offensive, they fielded some of their best remaining armoured units, including heavy tank battalions with King Tigers. Initial German successes came from surprise and weather that grounded Allied aircraft, but once American tank units recovered from initial shock, they applied all the lessons learned since Normandy. Lieutenant Hermann Bix, a Panther commander captured in January 1945, told interrogators, "We were told we would roll over the Americans as in 1940. Instead, they stopped us cold. Every time we attacked, they were ready. Every time we tried to establish defensive positions, they flanked us. These were not the same American tankers we'd fought earlier. These were veterans who'd learned to beat us." At Bastogne, outnumbered American tank units repeatedly defeated German armoured attacks through superior tactics. The 10th Armoured Division, despite having far fewer tanks than attacking German forces, destroyed dozens of Panthers and Tigers while losing relatively few Shermans. On December 23rd near Champs, Sergeant Frank Audifrid, the same tanker who'd pioneered shooter-killer tactics in July, commanded a platoon defending a critical road junction. His 5 Shermans faced attacks by elements of the 2nd Panzer Division, including 8 Panthers. Audifred had been fighting for 6 months and had become expert at tank versus tank combat. When the Panthers advanced, he executed a perfect defensive ambush. 1 Sherman opened fire at long range, not expecting to penetrate armour but to draw fire and reveal German positions. As the Panthers responded, Audifred's other 4 tanks struck from flanking positions. Within minutes, 5 Panthers were burning. The remaining 3 withdrew. Audifred's platoon lost 1 Sherman, and that crew survived with minor injuries. "It was almost easy," Audifred reported. "We knew exactly what to do." They made the mistakes we'd made 6 months earlier. By March 1945, American tank tactics had evolved from desperate improvisation to refined doctrine. The climactic proof came in Cologne, where Clarence Smoyer, the same corporal who'd nearly died in his first engagement in Normandy, would demonstrate how far American tankers had come. Smoyer was now a gunner in Eagle 7, an M26 Pershing commanded by Sergeant Bob Early. The Pershing represented America's answer to the Panther, a heavy tank with thick armour and a powerful 90mm gun. Only 20 Pershings had been shipped to Europe for combat trials, and Early's crew had been selected to operate one. The crew had been together since September 1944, surviving 9 months of continuous combat from Normandy through Belgium into Germany. They embodied institutional learning that had transformed American armour. Smoyer was no longer the frightened replacement who'd nearly died at Villiers-Fossard. He was now a veteran gunner who'd destroyed 5 German tanks. On March 6, 1945, Early's platoon was ordered to support infantry clearing Cologne Cathedral Square. The ancient cathedral still stood amid bombed-out ruins, one of the few intact buildings in a devastated city. As Eagle 7 approached the cathedral area, radio reports warned of German tanks in the vicinity. Minutes earlier, a Sherman from another unit had been destroyed by a Panther near the cathedral, killing 3 crew members. The German tank remained dangerous, positioned where it could command approaches to the square. Someone had to eliminate it. Early volunteered Eagle 7 for the mission. After 9 months of combat, his crew had complete confidence in their abilities and their commander. They'd learned every lesson American tankers had paid for in blood since D-Day. Now they would apply those lessons one more time. "We're going to use side streets to flank him," Early briefed his crew. "Standard approach. We'll edge into the intersection just far enough for Smoyer to get a shot, then back out if needed. Driver, be ready to move fast either direction." Driver Homer Davis acknowledged. Bow gunner William McVeigh checked his .30 caliber machine gun. Loader John DeRiggy positioned an armour-piercing round for immediate loading. Smoyer pressed his eye to the gun sight, already calculating angles and distances. As Eagle 7 approached the intersection where the Panther was reportedly positioned, Early climbed partially out of his cupola to get better visibility. He spotted Army Signal Corps cameraman Jim Bates taking cover nearby and waved him over. "You might want to film this," Early suggested. "Could be interesting." Bates grabbed his camera and found a position behind rubble where he could film the intersection. He'd filmed dozens of combat actions, but something about Early's confidence suggested this would be special. Early dropped back into the turret and gave final instructions. "Driver, advance slowly. Stop when I say. Smoyer, the Panther should be to our left. Fire when you've got a target. Don't wait for orders." Davis eased Eagle 7 forward. The Pershing's 90mm gun swung left as they approached the intersection. Through his periscope, Smoyer could see the distinctive silhouette of a Panther tank about 100 yards away, positioned near the cathedral. The German tank's gun was pointed down a different street. The crew apparently hadn't spotted the approaching Pershing. Then everything changed. As Eagle 7 edged into the intersection, the Panther's turret suddenly swung toward them. The German crew had spotted movement. Through his gun sight, Smoyer found himself looking directly down the barrel of the Panther's 75mm gun. 9 months of combat experience took over. Smoyer didn't panic. He didn't wait. He didn't think about how the Panther's gun was already aimed at them. He simply pressed the trigger. The Pershing's 90mm gun roared. The armour-piercing round struck the Panther's right side just below the gun shield, a perfect shot into vulnerable side armour. but Smoyer didn't know if he'd penetrated. He couldn't see the impact through the gun sight's restricted view. All he knew was that the Panther was still there, its gun still pointed at Eagle 7. "Reload!" Smoyer shouted. DeRiggy had already slammed another round into the breech. Smoyer fired again, hitting the Panther's side armour, then a third time. The Panther erupted in flames. 4 German crew members bailed out and ran. The 5th, the gunner, was killed before he could escape the burning tank. Bates's camera captured the entire engagement. The footage would become one of the most famous pieces of World War II combat film, a 45-second sequence showing an American tank destroying a German Panther in direct combat. What the camera didn't capture was the 9 months of learning that made those 3 shots possible. Smoyer had gotten lucky in Normandy, surviving his first engagement through fortune more than skill. But at Cologne, survival wasn't luck. It was training, experience, and tactics learned through the sacrifice of thousands of American tankers who died teaching their comrades how to win. After the battle, Early's crew dismounted to examine the destroyed Panther. Smoyer stood silently, looking at the burning German tank and thinking about the crew members who'd died inside. There was no triumph, no celebration, just exhaustion and relief at being alive. "Good shooting," Early said quietly, putting a hand on Smoyer's shoulder. Smoyer nodded but didn't reply. He was thinking about June 1944, when he'd been a terrified replacement watching Shermans burn around him. Now he was a veteran who'd just won a tank duel against supposedly superior German armour. The transformation from victim to victor had cost American armour thousands of lives, but the lessons learned had saved thousands more. The transformation of American armour from June 1944 to May 1945 came at staggering cost. Of roughly 16,000 Shermans deployed to Europe, approximately 4,200 were destroyed in combat, a 26% loss rate. Each Sherman carried 5 crew members. When a tank was penetrated by enemy fire, average crew survival was approximately 50%, meaning roughly 2.5 men died per destroyed tank. This translates to over 10,000 American tankers killed in action in Europe, with thousands more wounded or psychologically scarred. The learning curve was measured in lives. Early in Normandy, inexperienced crews had loss rates approaching 40% within their first 3 engagements. By autumn 1944, veteran crews using evolved tactics had reduced loss rates to under 15%. The difference between those percentages represented thousands of lives saved, but only after thousands of lives were lost learning the lessons. Corporal James Bates of the 4th Armoured Division survived the war despite his Sherman being destroyed 3 times. In a 1989 interview, he reflected, "First time we did everything wrong. Drove straight down a road, no security, no awareness. Panther got us from 800 yards. 3 of us survived because we bailed out fast. Second time we were smarter but not smart enough. Still got hit, but we were in better terrain so we could escape. Third time we were doing everything right, flanking, mutual support, using terrain. But sometimes you just get unlucky. By then we knew what we were doing, so all 5 of us survived." The psychological toll matched physical casualties. Tankers lived in constant awareness that their vehicle could become their coffin in seconds. The sound of an armour-piercing round hitting a Sherman was described by survivors as like a bell ringing, followed instantly by screams of wounded crew members, the smell of burning flesh and desperate scrambles to escape before ammunition detonated. Staff Sergeant Willard Dubose of the 2nd Armoured Division described the mental strain. "Every time you buttoned up hatches, you wondered if you'd ever open them again. Every time you advanced around a corner, you expected it to be your last. Some guys cracked, couldn't do it anymore. Nobody blamed them. The miracle was that most guys kept getting back in the tank day after day, knowing the odds. Crews that survived developed superstitions and rituals. Some wore the same lucky socks for entire campaigns. Others refused to name their tanks, believing it invited death. Lafayette Pool named all 3 of his Shermans In the Mood. When each was destroyed, he painted the same name on his replacement. Pool believed the name carried luck. When his 3rd In the Mood was destroyed by German artillery on September 15, 1944, Pool lost a leg but survived the war. The psychological impact extended beyond individuals to entire units. Tank battalions could lose 60 to 80% of their original crews during campaigns, creating units where replacements outnumbered veterans. Maintaining tactical proficiency while absorbing such losses required systematic training and strong leadership. Colonel Samuel Hogan, commanding Combat Command A of the 3rd Armored Division, established a replacement training program in August 1944. New tankers spent a week training with veteran crews before joining their assigned units. "We lost too many replacements in their first engagement," Hogan explained. "They'd do something stupid because they didn't know better. So we started teaching them before they saw combat. It saved lives. The program worked. Replacement crews who completed Hogan's training had survival rates 35% higher than replacements who went straight into combat. More importantly, trained replacements were effective immediately rather than requiring weeks to learn basic lessons. As the war progressed, this institutional learning became formalized. By early 1945, replacement training centers in England taught the tactics American tankers had developed in combat. New crews arrived in Europe already knowing the 5 rules for killing Panthers. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Army's Operations Research Office provided hard data on American tank performance. The statistics revealed the true scale of tactical transformation. In June 1944, during initial Normandy fighting, American armored units suffered unfavorable exchange ratios. Various studies suggest ratios between 1.5 to 1 and 3 to 1 against American forces, meaning Americans lost 1.5 to 1.3 tanks for every German tank destroyed. Exact ratios are disputed among historians, but all agree Americans had the worse end of exchanges in early Normandy. By September 1944, these ratios had improved dramatically. The 4th Armored Division at Araucourt destroyed 86 German tanks while losing 41 Shermans, slightly better than 2 to 1 in favor of Americans. More importantly, when examining tank versus tank combat specifically, excluding losses to anti-tank guns and artillery, American performance was even better. A study of armored engagements from August to November 1944 found that in direct tank versus tank combat, American units were destroying German tanks at approximately equal exchange rates. This represented a stunning reversal. The Sherman hadn't improved, German tanks remained technically superior, but American tactics had evolved to negate German advantages. Crew survival statistics showed similar improvement. In June 1944, when a Sherman was destroyed, an average of 2.8 crew members became casualties. By February 1945, this had dropped to approximately 1.1 casualties per destroyed tank. Better tactics weren't just destroying more German tanks, they were saving American lives. The 3rd Armored Division provides detailed long-term statistics. From June 1944 to May 1945, the division destroyed an estimated 1,001 German tanks while losing 648 Shermans. This overall ratio of 1.5 to 1 in favor of Americans represented remarkable success against technically superior opponents. More impressive is that these numbers include losses to German anti-tank guns, not just tank versus tank combat. When examining only tank versus tank engagements, American performance was significantly better, likely approaching 2 to 1 or better in their favor. Mechanical reliability proved equally important to combat success. German tanks, particularly Panthers, required extensive maintenance and suffered high breakdown rates. A Panther needed major overhauls every 1,000 miles. Shermans could run 2,000 miles between major maintenance. In sustained operations, German mechanical failure rates approached 30%, while American rates stayed under 5%. This meant that in any sustained campaign, American armored units maintained higher percentages of operational tanks. During the Battle of the Bulge, many German tanks were abandoned due to mechanical failure rather than combat damage. American recovery and maintenance units could repair damaged Shermans and return them to action quickly, while German tanks requiring major repairs were often lost. Ammunition availability also favored Americans. Each Sherman carried 90 to 100 rounds of main gun ammunition. Supply lines kept units well stocked with replacement ammunition. German forces, particularly in late 1944, often suffered ammunition shortages. Panthers and Tigers that ran out of ammunition in combat were effectively useless, forced to withdraw or be abandoned. The tactical innovations of 1944 continued evolving through early 1945. American tankers never stopped learning, never stopped adapting. Each engagement produced new lessons, new refinements to existing tactics. One significant development was improved coordination with infantry. Early in Normandy, tanks and infantry often operated independently, limiting mutual support. By early 1945, tank infantry coordination had become extremely sophisticated. Lieutenant William Devlin of the 36th Armoured Infantry Regiment described the evolution. In June, we'd advance behind tanks, hoping they'd protect us. By March, we were a team. Infantry would scout ahead, identify German positions, then tanks would hit them while we provided security. When tanks encountered German armour, we'd suppress their infantry with machine guns so our tankers could manoeuvre freely. We worked together instead of just working nearby. This integration proved particularly effective in urban combat. During the Rhine River crossings in March 1945, tank infantry teams cleared German-held cities with efficiency that would have been impossible earlier in the campaign. Tanks provided firepower and protection, while infantry cleared buildings and protected tanks from German infantry anti-tank weapons. Artillery coordination also improved dramatically. Forward observers with tank units could call for artillery support within minutes. During the Battle of the Bulge, coordinated tank artillery attacks repeatedly broke up German counterattacks that might otherwise have succeeded. Tank-destroyer cooperation evolved as well. The M18 Hellcat and M36 Jackson tank destroyers, with superior anti-tank guns, worked alongside Sherman units. Tank destroyers would engage German heavy tanks at long range, while Shermans manoeuvred for close-range killing shots. This combined arms approach maximized each vehicle type's strengths. Night operations became increasingly common and effective. American tankers developed techniques for fighting in darkness that German crews couldn't match. Using radio coordination and pre-planned routes, American tanks could move and attack at night while German tanks remained stationary. On March 22, 1945, during the Rhine crossing at Remagen, Lieutenant John Warren led a night attack by 6 Shermans against German positions near the bridgehead. Moving without lights using terrain features for navigation, Warren's platoon penetrated German lines and destroyed supply vehicles and artillery positions before withdrawing. The Germans never identified American tanks operating in their rear areas at night. "We owned the night," Warren reported. "German tanks couldn't move effectively in darkness, so we had mobility advantages. We'd hit them at night, then pull back before dawn. It drove them crazy." Air support integration reached peak effectiveness by spring 1945. Fighter bombers equipped with rockets could destroy even heavy German tanks. Tank units learned to call for air support and mark targets for aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolts armed with rockets became particularly effective tank killers. The coordination worked both ways. Aircraft would spot German armor movements and direct American tanks to intercept. This combination of air reconnaissance and ground firepower made it nearly impossible for German tanks to move during daylight without being detected and attacked. The final major tank engagement of the European War occurred near Dessau on April 23, 1945. Elements of the 3rd Armoured Division, the same unit that had fought in Normandy, encountered Battle Group Clausewitz, one of the last German armoured formations. The Germans had assembled 18 Panthers and 12 Panzer IVs for a final defensive stand. By this point, American tank tactics had been refined through 11 months of continuous combat. The 3rd Armoured Tankers executed textbook attacks. Working in coordinated teams, they used all 5 rules simultaneously: overwhelming numbers, terrain exploitation, shooter-killer splits, pack tactics, and speed. Within 3 hours, every German tank was destroyed or abandoned. The 3rd Armoured Division lost only 4 Shermans, with just 2 crew members killed. It was a far cry from June 1944, when the same division had suffered devastating losses in early Normandy battles. Captain James Leach, who had participated in some of the first successful tank engagements in July 1944, commanded a company during the Dessau battle. "We'd come full circle," he reflected. The tactics we'd learned by trial and error in Normandy had become precise doctrine. We'd turned our greatest weakness, inferior tanks, into irrelevance through superior tactics. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, American armored forces had destroyed an estimated 7,000 German armored vehicles, including tanks, assault guns, and tank destroyers. American losses were approximately 4,200 tanks destroyed. Considering German tanks were individually superior, this exchange ratio represented stunning tactical achievement. More importantly, by war's end, American tank crews had transformed from frightened novices into the world's most experienced and tactically proficient armoured force. They had fought across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and Germany. They had fought in hedgerows, cities, forests, snow, and mud. They had learned every possible lesson about tank warfare. The cost of that education was staggering. Over 10,000 American tankers killed in action, thousands more wounded, countless more psychologically scarred. But their sacrifice created institutional knowledge that saved lives. The tactics developed in 1944 saved lives in 1945. The lessons learned in Europe would save lives in future conflicts. Lafayette Pool, the tank ace who destroyed 12 German tanks and 258 armoured vehicles, survived his wounds and returned home to Texas. He lost his leg, but not his spirit. Pool re-enlisted in 1948 and served with the 3rd Armoured Division as an instructor, teaching new tankers the tactics he'd helped develop. At a 1984 reunion of the 3rd Armoured Division Association, Pool delivered the keynote address from his wheelchair. People always want to talk about how our tanks were inferior to the Germans. That's missing the point. Yes, the Panther was a better tank, but we were better tankers. We didn't win because we had better equipment. We won because we figured out how to use what we had better than they used what they had. That's the American way, not having the best, but making the best of what you have. Clarence Smoyer, the gunner who destroyed the Panther at Cologne Cathedral, returned home to Pennsylvania and lived quietly for decades. He rarely spoke about his experiences, like many veterans. When author Adam Makos tracked him down in 2013 for research on a book, Smoyer agreed to return to Cologne. The trip became a journey of reconciliation. Smoyer met Gustav Schäfer, a German soldier who had also fought in Cologne. Together they laid flowers at the grave of Katharina Esser, a civilian woman killed during the fighting. Smoyer had carried guilt about civilian casualties for nearly 70 years. The meeting brought some measure of peace. "I don't think she haunts me," Smoyer said, "but I needed to acknowledge what happened. War is terrible. We did what we had to do, but we should never forget the cost." Creighton Abrams, who commanded the 37th Tank Battalion during the war, rose to become Army Chief of Staff from 1972 to 1974. He never forgot the lessons of World War II armoured combat. In a 1972 interview, Abrams stated, "The greatest generation wasn't great because they had better equipment or easier circumstances. They were great because they faced impossible odds and found ways to win. Our tankers in Europe proved that wars aren't won by equipment, but by soldiers who refuse to accept that inferior equipment means inevitable defeat." The veterans of American armoured units carried these lessons throughout their lives. At reunions decades later, the evolution from hunted to hunter became legendary, a story that defined their generation's approach to warfare. They had proven that technological inferiority could be overcome through tactical innovation, that thinking could defeat engineering, that American ingenuity could triumph over German precision. The tactical lessons learned by American tank crews in World War II influenced U.S. armor doctrine for decades. The emphasis on tactical flexibility, decentralized decision-making, combined arms coordination, and aggressive maneuver warfare became fundamental principles of American military doctrine. During the Gulf War in 1991, American armored forces employed tactics that would have been instantly recognizable to World War II veterans. M1 Abrams tanks attacked in coordinated platoons, used terrain and maneuver to gain flanking positions, and relied on superior tactics rather than just superior technology to defeat Iraqi armor. Lieutenant General Frederick Franks, who commanded 7th Corps during Desert Storm, had served as an armor officer in Vietnam where he'd been wounded and lost a leg. He explicitly referenced World War II lessons in his operational planning. Our fathers learned in Europe that you don't need the best tank if you have the best tactics. Tactics, training, and leadership beat technology. We proved that again in Iraq. The U.S. Army's Armor School at Fort Knox incorporated the tactical innovations of World War II into formal doctrine. The 5 rules that American tank crews learned through trial and error in Normandy became training dogma. Never fight fair, use the terrain, coordinate fires, hunt in packs, speed equals survival. Modern American armor doctrine still emphasizes these principles. Tank platoons train to operate as coordinated teams, not individual vehicles. Terrain analysis remains fundamental to tactical planning. Combined arms integration, tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support working together is standard practice. The intellectual legacy may be even more important than specific tactical techniques. American military culture learned to value innovation and adaptation over rigid doctrine. Junior officers and NCOS are encouraged to experiment and develop new tactics, rather than simply following prescribed methods. This flexibility, purchased in blood during World War II, became a defining characteristic of American military effectiveness. The story of American tank crews in World War II teaches lessons extending far beyond military history. It's about overcoming disadvantages through innovation and adaptation. It's about organizational learning, about how institutions can transform failure into success through honest assessment and rapid change. The American tankers of 1944 to 45 didn't have the luxury of demanding better equipment. They had to win with what they had, and they did. They took admittedly inferior tanks and developed tactics so effective that by war's end, German tankers feared American Shermans despite their technical inferiority. This wasn't because Americans were braver or smarter than Germans. It was because American military culture permitted junior officers and NCOS to innovate, to experiment, to develop new tactics based on battlefield experience rather than pre-war doctrine. German military culture, for all its tactical proficiency, remained more rigid. German tankers kept trying to fight the long-range precision battle they'd been trained for, even as American crews repeatedly refused to fight that battle. The transformation was psychological as much as tactical. American tank crews who entered combat in June 1944, terrified of German armor, finished the war as confident hunters. They learned that technological inferiority could be overcome through tactical innovation, that thinking could defeat engineering. Sergeant Raymond Foch of the 7th Armored Division, writing home in April 1945, captured this transformation. "When we landed in France, we were scared boys in inferior tanks. We're leaving Germany as men who learned to win with what we had. We didn't just blind German tanks. We opened our eyes to what American soldiers can do when they're free to innovate." The smoke has long since cleared from those European battlefields. The hedgerows of Normandy are peaceful again. The streets of Cologne have been rebuilt, but the lesson remains as clear as ever. In any contest, victory goes not to those with the best tools, but to those who use their tools best. The American tank crews who learned to defeat Panthers with supposedly inferior Shermans taught us that innovation matters more than technology, that tactics beat equipment, that thinking beats engineering. They proved that adequate equipment in skilled hands beats superior equipment in average hands. They entered combat as frightened boys in inferior tanks. They emerged as men who had learned to win with what they had. They didn't win because they had the best tanks. They won because they became the best tankers. That transformation cost over 10,000 American lives. Each destroyed Sherman represented 5 men who risked death every time they climbed through the hatches. Some died quickly, killed instantly when armor-piercing rounds penetrated their tanks. Others burned to death, trapped in wreckage. Still others survived physically, but carried psychological scars the rest of their lives. Their sacrifice was not in vain. The tactics they developed saved thousands of other tankers' lives. The lessons they learned, purchased in blood, became institutional knowledge that has saved lives in every conflict since. From Korea to Vietnam to the Gulf War to Iraq and Afghanistan, American soldiers have applied the fundamental principle those World War II tankers discovered. Innovation and adaptation matter more than initial advantages. As the last veterans of those battles pass into history, their legacy endures in American military doctrine that prizes innovation over equipment, thinking over technology, adaptation over rigidity. They had entered combat with inferior tanks and emerged victorious through superior tactics. It was perhaps the most American victory of all, winning not through industrial might alone, but through the ingenuity of citizen soldiers who refused to accept that inferior equipment meant inevitable defeat. They proved that in war, as in life, the greatest weapon isn't found in factories or laboratories, but in the minds of soldiers who refuse to accept defeat. The story began with frightened replacements watching their comrades burn in Norman fields. It ended with veterans who had mastered the art of tank warfare, proving that American soldiers, given freedom to innovate, could overcome any challenge. The transformation took less than a year. The lessons will last forever.